welcome to Can I Just Say? I'm Daphne Olive. Elizabeth cannot be here this week, but I have the loveliest of guests, my friend Christine Kippens.
Yes. Hi, friend.
Christine is here to talk with me about season 7 of Game of Thrones.
So excited!
As am I. I've been laughing at myself all day. Like, I was a fan of Game of Thrones long before I was ever a fan of Black Sails, which is what brought me to podcasting, and before even I was a fan of Outlander, which is like what kind of put podcasting about television on my radar. And so this is hilarious that I've never, ever talked about Game of Thrones on a podcast.
Are you serious?
I did release... So Christine and I were on panels, right? We were on 2 panels together. We were on panels together at Con of Thrones last year. So I did release those panels as podcasts, but I haven't actually recorded an episode about Game of Thrones until today. And I'm so happy to be doing it with you, Christine.
Oh my God. Wait, this is your first Can I Say podcast on Game of Thrones?
Yep.
I am so honored. Oh my God, now my excitement is even more palpable now.
So this is really exciting. Okay, so let's start by going through our histories with this show. Christine, tell me your history with both Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire.
Sure. So they're one and the same, actually. So I was in a relationship at the time that the show came out. And my boyfriend at the time was very excited about this new show that was coming out on HBO. It was going to be like set in medieval times and have dragons and be really cool. And he's describing it to me. And I was just like, dude, this sounds like the dumbest thing I've ever heard of in my life. I don't want to watch this. And he's like, no, we're going to watch this together and it's going to be great. So I watched the first episode with him and I'm kind of paying attention, not 100%. And you get to the end of the pilot where Jaime and Cersei are getting it on in one of the towers at Winterfell. And all of a sudden it has my attention. And there's poor Bran and Jaime shoves him out the blasted window. And I just jumped up like, what the hell just happened? What is this? What is this show? And from that moment on, I was hooked. I was way more into the show than my boyfriend was. And we finished watching season 1 together. And I had this moment where I was just like, do I read the books or do I wait for season 2? Do I read the books or do I wait for season 2? And I couldn't wait for season 2. So I ended up reading all 5 books in between those 2 seasons. The 5th book had come out in between.
Right. It came out in between, right? Mm-hmm. That's what I was trying to remember. Okay.
So I had a friend. I had no idea even while I was watching that the show was based on a set of books. But a colleague's husband and I were talking about the show and he told me that he's been reading the book since the 90s and had been waiting years for the 5th book to come out. And when it finally did come out, he started reading it. I was still on the 4th book. I ended up finishing the 5th book before he did. I was that into A Song of Ice and Fire. I just had to know everything because the first season of Game of Thrones was just such a compelling story.
Yep.
And I love political machinations. I live in DC. I work in policy. I'm really into this stuff. You know, I'm into it in real life. So for me to see an interesting portrayal of it on HBO, it hooked me from the very first episode.
So yeah, I mean, it's funny. We've actually, just full disclosure, we've actually told each other these stories. So yeah, my version is kind of different because I was like so sold just from like the first trailers. And I keep meaning to look those up. Like the first ads for it on HBO, and I was very involved in watching all of the shows on HBO at the time before it started. The first ads were like, maybe you saw Sean Bean kind of like brooding, but mostly you saw those wings. And And just the kind of visual tone of it and those wings. And I was like, I don't know what the hell this is, but I have to watch it. And I was waiting for it. I was so excited about it before it even came. And I had not read the books and I'd never heard of the books. And it was the same. I watched season 1 and then immediately, just started immediately after that. I did not know about Ned. Thank goodness. I just feel bad for anyone who doesn't get to experience that ending of season 1 or book 1 once without knowing. That's a sad thing to go into it knowing that. It's a really phenomenal experience to have. And yeah, it was the same. I was so hooked. And then I read all of the books. I think I read all of the books twice before season 2 started. And maybe not, at least the 4 books I read twice. Because I feel like Dance of Dragons came out right before the season, if I'm correct. I don't know. But yeah, it was the same thing. And I'm a funny person because, as people, or at least our usual listeners know that, my fandom is Black Sails.
Which you got me to watch.
Which I did.
You spoke of Black Sails within 5 minutes of us meeting each other.
Well, I was with Lauren Sarner, who our listeners also know. So there is that. I think I, more than Lauren, came to Con of Thrones with an agenda, but Lauren was definitely in on it. We definitely went to Con of Thrones with the agenda of having fun, talking about television, which we both love to do, but also absolutely recruiting.
You sure did. And just so everyone knows, I am fully recruited. I have seen all 4 seasons. I thought it was fantastic. So I totally understand the obsession.
Yes, it is fabulous. And, we have that other podcast about that. Okay, so about this, I came up with some topics. It was really fun to rewatch. I rewatched all of the seasons before Con of Thrones last spring. It was really fun. I rewatched season 7 this time and then decided I needed to go back and rewatch season 6, which is better than I remembered. I am definitely lover of the early seasons of Game of Thrones more than the latter ones, but this rewatch has been really fun. So yeah, there's definitely stuff I'm not crazy about, but there's really a lot more in both seasons 6 and 7 that I love than I remembered.
And it's funny on the rewatch how there are scenes that you remember from the first watch that really stayed with you. And then on your rewatch, all of a sudden you're more obsessed about different scenes, which was my experience on my rewatch, that I remember wanting to see a certain scene over and over. But for some reason, this time having more of an emotional connection to other scenes.
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. For me, I probably did have that as well. I mean, for me, it's every time I watch, I love Sansa more. I'm just I was absolutely, and I said this in our panels, which are, listeners, you can go back into our feed and find there's 2 panels from Con of Thrones last year that I put up as podcasts. I am definitely a person who is surprised by how much I love show Sansa. I just really love what they've done with her. So for me, it's just every rewatch just ends up making me love her more, love her story more. For me, actually, I think part of why the rewatches are fun, because the stuff that I really didn't love, I can kind of go, okay, fine, we're there. You know what I mean? It's I can kind of
it makes sense.
Well, some of them don't, but I can gloss over them much better because I'm, you know what I mean? They're not going to surprise me. I'm just okay, fine. We're at this part. I find this a little bit boring or, a little bit not my favorite storytelling procedure, but it's just okay, fine. We're just, I'll weather that part. It's not a big deal. And then I'll get to something that is really satisfying for me. And so I actually was more emotionally invested in season 7 now than I had been in the past, which is fun.
Yeah.
Rewatches are good. All right. So let's start. I mostly, Liz and I often go through characters. What I did here is I made us a list of, in large part, quotes, but quotes/themes that I wanted to talk about, because we definitely can't go episode by episode for 7 episodes. So I wanted to start actually with something that's very appropriate for both of us because we are both in love with the politics. I wanted to start with the quote that that Lady Olenna said to Daenerys, where she said, "Be the dragon." And so I really wanted to start by talking about not just Daenerys, but primarily Daenerys and like what leadership means, like who we think she is, what her struggle is about that, and like where the show is taking us in the questions of what it means to be a leader. I feel like she's getting a lot of mixed messages. And like, where do you think that she has a sense of who she is, or do you think she's kind of learning as she goes along?
I think any great leader learns as they go along, because not every situation is going to require the same tactics that you've used in previous situations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like everyone is learning and developing as they go along and gaining more information. In terms of the leader she wants to be, I think she has a good sense of that. She does have a little bit of a temper, which, you know,
which Tyrion brought up.
And I think folks are a little nervous based on her lineage as to what that temper means. But for the most part, I think she's fairly consistent in that she surrounds herself with advisors. She takes their counsel, and then she makes a decision based on, you know, on the advice that is given to her. Even though things may, you know, her advisors may differ, they might have different takes on things, she ultimately makes a decision and makes sure that everyone follows it. And one thing I do like about her leadership style is that she will often quote her advisor as she makes her pronouncement, mm-hmm. right? So you mm-hmm. remember in season 7, everyone's around the great table, the great map of Westeros planning the invasion, and Daenerys says, "I'm not here to be the Queen of Ashes," which is exactly what Tyrion said to her, trying to convince her to not take her dragon straight to King's Landing and just burn the Red Keep to the ground and win handily, but of course killing almost 1 million people at the same time. So I kind of like that about her. She really brings her advisors into her leadership.
Yeah, the thing that was interesting to me in this watch is, because Tyrion also says that. He says that specifically to Jaime, like that she chooses advisors that will check her. Mm-hmm. I found what was interesting to me that it actually, in my mind, goes beyond. And again, this is not like she worries me. I mean, let me before I'm about to say really nice things about her, let me say that she worries me a lot. And actually, going back to season 6 really brought that up, like how she ended up with all these Dothraki that she has, like really mm-hmm. was about a power play where she is showing a level of magic-based dominance that scares the shit out of me. Like in terms of like it's like really exciting for me as a viewer of a fantasy show, but it's like scary when I think about like actual leaders leading people. But what was interesting to me in this rewatch is not just that she chooses advisors that will check her, but that she seems to really have a handle on the motivations of the advisors when they're advising her. And mm-hmm. that was really interesting to me. Like that was a level of intelligence in leadership that was fascinating to me in this rewatch. Like when Olenna says, "Be the dragon," like, you know, that's sound advice perhaps for a certain kind of leadership. But I feel like she understood completely that what Olenna wants from her is vengeance.
100%.
Right?
I think, yes, that is such a spot on take. I mean, she did the same thing in Karth, right? When she realizes that Jorah's in love with her, and Jorah is trying to advise her to do certain things, and she totally calls him out on it and tells him he's getting too familiar with her. You know, I feel like she did that also with Daario. You're right. And she's very wary of Tyrion at this point. She's very wary of him and his love for his family, but also his self-importance. She totally
Yep.
called him out on trying
Yep.
to quote
Oh.
himself.
Oh my goodness.
You know,
And he
present
did,
his-
by the way, he did that in season 6.
Yes.
He did that in season 6 and he owned up to it, not to her. But it was
Right,
funny, like
exactly.
when I went back to season 6, because I had just tweeted that gif of her being like, did you just quote yourself and try to pass it off as like ancient
Great
wisdom?
wisdom.
And it was like, he actually did that in season 6. Oh shoot, what's her name?
Missandei and
Thank
Grey
you. Missandei was like, who said that? And he was like, oh, I believe it was me. I said
Me.
that.
Just now.
So yes, I love that
Which
there was that
I have
callback.
I have been meaning to do that, by the way, in casual conversation.
Just start quoting yourself as
Yes,
if
just
ancient
quote
wisdom.
myself. You know, as the great philosopher once said.
You could totally pull that shit off. So that's a really interesting thing for me. And I guess that's part of a larger, I mean, I do want to go back to like, we will talk about magic and politics a little bit later. That is one of my topics that I think you and I especially will have a lot of fun talking about. But what I think is really interesting about this season is like this is a really women-based season. Like women are taking over. I mean, we've got John, right? John's like reluctant hero. So like that's a trope. But like when I started making the notes and like figuring out the topics, I was like, okay, let's talk about Daenerys and let's talk about Cersei and let's talk about Sansa. And I was just like, holy shit, 3 women are running the show right now. I mean, literally running the actual television show and running the political show within Westeros.
Well, I wish the showrunners, at least one, was a woman, because then maybe we would have we would have a different take on storytelling for certain issues. But 100%, there are so many characters who are female who are running the show and also supporting these women of power. So you look at Dany's table, she's got Yara advising her. She's got Ellaria advising her. She has Lady Olenna advising her. She has Missandei standing there advising her.
Right.
And
the one person I actually trust to advise her.
Right. And because representation matters, he's not a woman, but you've got Tyrion Lannister, who is a short person. So like you've got this wonderful diversity around her table. And of course, Sansa, unfortunately, she's looking to Littlefinger a lot. But by the end of the season, she knows she can trust her sister. She knows she can trust Brienne. So she is also surrounded by some very strong, very capable women.
Yeah, it's a really interesting direction they've taken. Yes, I agree with you. We definitely feel the lack of women in the writers' room, not because of who's in charge, but of certain there's nuance that I think would have added to a lot of these storylines. So we don't need to get into like me starting the list, because I also don't really like to rewrite other people's shows. But like there's nuance that would have, I think, made their stories even more powerful, potentially. But having said that, I'm okay with that. I think the thing that becomes an interesting metric then, when we have, again, we're about to do a panel about this, about women in politics at the next Common of Thrones. So it's like a little bit of a preview, I guess, of the things I want to say about it. But the one of the interesting metrics that you could kind of do a graph of these women leaders is then learning. Is like the ones that choose to learn and the ones that have been forced to learn and the ones that choose not to learn. And they all learn. I mean, obviously they all learn, like, but it's interesting because like, I feel like, you know, Sansa has been forced to learn hard lessons, obviously, and she has embraced that role very well. Daenerys, I feel like, goes back and forth. The story kind of has taken her in both directions, where she has periods where she's like, fuck that, I know everything. I don't need to learn. I'm awesome. And periods where, like this season in particular, where she seemed to be very much about learning. You know, she's sometimes a little begrudging about it, but she gets there. And then you have Cersei, who's just like, I already learned everything because I learned shit from my dad, and I just don't really need to learn anymore. I mean, to some extent, she's, you know, she did learn from one of the masters of like
I love Tywin.
Political manipulation. So there's no question she chose a very good person to be her mentor, or whatever he chose her. No, I guess she chose him because he didn't want to mentor her. But yeah, I think I think part of what's going on with her right now is she's like, yeah, whatever, I learned already. I'm done.
Oh yeah, she's stubborn. She's stubborn. She doesn't trust that she could learn from anyone else.
Yeah.
She knows everything.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that's going to be that's going to be one of the things I'm watching in season 8 is to see how a character's, like, to what extent, how much they embrace the idea that they are learning and should learn and need to continue learning and have been capable of learning, like how that will pan out with how their story, comes to its conclusion within the world of this show. I'm not proposing that somehow learning is going to save people, like, because I just feel like,
there's only so much you can use against the Night King.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's part of our politics versus magic question. Right. And and I think that, also, I just think this is a very unpredictable show. I don't think this isn't a story that necessarily rewards people for making good choices all the time. And I'm okay with that. Like, because I think that's a very simplistic way to tell a story, because the world doesn't work that way.
It does not, unfortunately.
Right? We don't necessarily get rewarded for being good or doing good or, or being smart even. Like, part of me loves the show for rewarding smart characters, and part of me is really happy when the show says, yeah, but that's not everything. Like, we can't, like, if we made it that easy for you to just be like, oh, well, this person's being smart, therefore they will succeed and survive, that would also end up being boring eventually.
Right. Or just one mistake. One mistake can cost you so much.
Right. And, that's that. As long as it's told well, I'm happy with that. It's not always told well.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk now. I guess the next thing I did put on the list was the relationship of politics and magic. So let's maybe talk about that, because that is definitely going to end up in every single conversation. Like you just said, like that everything can end up being made moot because of the Night King. This was the thing that was really striking to me in my watch going back to season 6, was this thing where you had these parallel storylines of how Daenerys goes from being a captive of the Dothraki to basically in charge of all of them, because she is unburnt, because she can survive fire and be out, and is mother of dragons too. But the moment that it happens in season 6 is when she burns down the temple that I don't know the name of, and all the khals and everyone bows down to her. And I'm like, part of me sees that moment as yeah, girl power, that's awesome. But most of me says, holy shit, this woman, her legitimacy is in large part this. I feel like the show's telling us different stories about her. So the show tells us the story oh, she's the breaker of chains, and Missandei says we all chose her, she's our queen that we chose. But partly the show's saying people follow her because she can walk out of a blazing building and has dragons.
I mean, she's got 3 nuclear bombs. Well, I mean,
2.
Not 3 anymore. She's down to 2. Night King sold 1. Night King now has a nuclear bomb.
Right.
But at the same time, yes, it's completely unfair that she can portray herself as, and she says this in the books a lot, I'm just a girl.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I like it when she does that when she's fucking with people. She did do that where she's just excuse me, I am not so educated, but I like her little underhanded version of that. But yeah.
Right. I mean, and the greatest example of that was when she quote unquote bought the Unsullied.
Right.
For the cost of 1 dragon, and the whole time she understood High Valyrian.
Yeah. No, that's fabulous.
I mean, it was a fantastic scene. But She is extremely powerful based on her name, based on her lineage,
And
you know,
magic.
based on magic. And that's part of that is luck. The family you're born to, the name you're given, and the fact that these three dragon eggs that once belonged to her family, a few centuries ago, were returned to her.
Well,
And
and she can survive fire.
And she can survive fire, which, in the books, it was supposed to be a one-time thing, and they've made it into this superhero power that she has in the show, which I guess is great, but it's a little bit of a cheat when you think about someone like Cersei, right? What's her superhero power? She's got
politics.
Money.
Well, and politics.
I feel like that, though, is more of a level playing field because
no, it is. That's what I'm saying.
Great house, right? If you're part of a great house, you get part of that training. Robb Stark didn't start his war not knowing how to conduct a war, right? Like his father brought him up to be a great lord.
You see that with Jon Snow when he joins the Night's Watch, is that, most of the people there, like some of them were lords, but and came from high houses where they definitely learned swordplay. But they show that to us very well, that like he is the bastard of his household, but he grew up knowing that shit. So yeah, that's true. Like everyone there, there's the class issues are there no matter what. The thing that's interesting to me with the show overall is like this started as a show about politics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I feel like there is kind of an inherent issue with the story that once magic entered, right? And it was gradual and that was really cool to kind of have it gradually growing, and we don't really know where this mythology is going to go in the beginning. But there is a problem when there's like a basic storytelling problem when you have a woman like her with three dragons. Like, yes, you can, you have this whole ethical thing about how she doesn't want to burn down King's Landing because she wants to be a ruler, not a conqueror. But like, basically you have an essential storytelling problem of like, some people are just too powerful now.
Right. Which is why I think that we are in this for right now.
Right.
And at the end of the show, one of my theories is there really isn't going to be much magic left in Westeros. I think
this is my hope.
Anybody has died and come back or has some type of magical power, they're dead. They're done.
Interesting. Okay, that's a big prediction. All right, Christine going bold with the predictions right up front.
Write it down, date it. That's what I said. No, but I really think that because magic can be such a game changer, it's going to go away at the end of the show.
Well, I think it has to go one of two ways. It either has to completely be the only issue, because ultimately, like, it's really then it just comes down to like Daenerys versus the Night King, right? Ultimately, right? Because they're just like, both of them are just way more powerful than anyone else. Or what you said, that we're going to have like revert back, which kind of from a storytelling perspective, I find that more interesting because, and again, I know there are a lot of fans of the show who really are and I love the dragons. I love all this. Like, I enjoyed it so much. I enjoy that stuff, but it's almost like that's like my guilty pleasure, because I do think that once you bring magic in and these like superpowers, it becomes kind of less interesting in a lot of ways.
Oh, see, I think the opposite. It's what makes it different, right? If I want to watch a show about politics and people vying for power, I could just watch MSNBC, I could watch CNN, I could watch BBC News, or I could read a book about the Tudors or the Plantagenets or whatever, The fact that there are dragons and people who can't be burnt and people who come back from the dead, and somehow mystically survive getting dunked into ice water and travel several miles in, the freezing cold and still survive. I think
Sorry,
that's what makes it interesting. It makes it different. It makes it a completely different world. Or else, I could just watch Outlaw King and see the same show.
No, you're right. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I love fantasy. I really love fantasy. That's not the point I'm making. I'm not wishing there was no magic at all. And also, I mean, I'm a person who way prefers to have my disturbing things, like politics, be in the form, I mean, obviously I have to deal with the real world stuff, but that's no fun for me.
Right.
When I see things that would be disturbing to me as real things in the form of well done fiction, I'm happy.
Right.
Like that's how I like to consume those. So I love to consume my, crazy politics in the form of a story. And in the beginning, I would say that Game of Thrones really had almost no peers on that front of showing political machinations. So I'm actually going to say this, as much as I love the political machinations in Black Sails, I think that season 1 of Game of Thrones actually does that part better. I know. Season one of Game of Thrones is 1 through 3. Seasons 1 through 3 are phenomenal.
Girl, your
from that perspective.
These folks are gonna come for you.
I know. I mean, the political machinations in Black Sails are also incredible. What I ended up valuing more in Black Sails is more philosophical stuff.
Yes.
So I'm not against the magic. I think what I'm trying to say is that maybe they took it too far. Like maybe that's what I'm trying to say. It's like we've reached a point right now. And again, we don't have it season 8 yet. So like it's possible that season 8 will deal with that issue of this power imbalance in a way that'll make it feel like you can never judge a show until you've watched the whole thing.
Right.
So it's like it's very possible that they're going to take it in a direction that will make this imbalance that there is right now like feel really meaningful. And I'm hoping that. Like that's one of my greatest hopes. And also like tracking I don't track the mythology like people who like know all of the everything and spend time on Reddit and all of that. But, every time once we went beyond the books and we started getting bits of mythology that we didn't know yet. I mean, that's, my husband would just sit there and just laugh at me because like, it's just like the first time we saw that Valyrian Steel kills White Walkers, I was just like freaking out because it was like, we didn't know this yet. Like, this is amazing. And so, yes. So don't get me wrong. I love that shit. I really love it. I just, and I don't know yet what the show's trying to say. Like what I was saying about season 6 is that we had this Daenerys thing going in tandem with the story about the Sparrow, the Great Sparrow. No, not Great Sparrow. What is he? The
High Sparrow.
High Sparrow. I know. I keep wanting to say Little Sparrow, and I don't even know what that's from. The Little Sparrows are his people, right?
Yeah.
So I thought it was really interesting on this rewatch to see how those two storylines were going in tandem because we're obviously supposed to feel like what he's doing is kind of using religion as a bludgeon, and that this is absolutely an abuse of people's faith to motivate them. And what's really interesting how those two stories happen in parallel because you do get to that moment where Daenerys burns the Khals, and I feel like the juxtaposition of the two stories is supposed to be guiding you on some level, or for me, it guided me on some level this time as a real commentary on, her potential danger to people is obvious, but it felt like a very explicit moment where it's really exposing that in a way that's really interesting.
Right. So what's the difference really between Dany locking all the Khals in that hut and lighting them on fire and the High Sparrow locking everyone in the Great Sept, but Cersei blowing them up?
Right.
Is there really much of a difference between those two? The two of them are just very extreme.
The difference is that we like Marjorie. That's the difference. Honestly, that's the only. No, but I'm saying that's not a real difference. That's like how the emotional difference ends up. But you're right.
And
that's a really
Loras.
good point. That's a really, really good point. Right.
And I would include the High Sparrow in the extremists list. You know, so
No, absolutely.
I'm trying to figure out who is the person who brings balance to the Force in Westeros. Who is that? Is that Jon? I'm not quite sure, because he goes in the opposite direction of being extremely honorable. I will not tell a lie, even though he kind of did with Qhorin Halfhand and infiltrating the wildlings and whatnot, which isn't that dissimilar from what his uncle did in raising him as his son. You know, so I'm still trying to figure out who's the middle ground leader, and it might be Sansa Stark.
It might be. Also, I hate to tell you,
this
may not be a story where the Force becomes balanced. I mean, this just may not be that kind of story. I feel like this is what I used to say to black salespeople all the time when everyone was like, "I want everyone to be happy," and I'm just like, not this kind. I don't think.
Well, if you think this has a happy ending, right, you come to the wrong place.
You're barking up the wrong tree. Right. I mean, and I could be wrong. I mean, I seriously am not going to try to make. I mean, we are going to make predictions, but I'm going to say, like, straight up, I have no idea, and I am probably wrong. And I have a very bad track record of predictions, like super bad track record. So. Yeah, I don't know if that's going to happen. I just don't know if it's that kind of story. I mean, again, I know everyone quotes the George R. R. Martin at some point said bittersweet and like mentioned the Lord of the Rings, but you know what? He likes to fuck with people. I don't trust anything that man says, honestly.
Man, do you really think George knows how this story ends?
Oh, who knows?
I mean,
whatever.
Let's be real for a second.
Well, okay, he could have like had some like vague idea in his head, and he also could have a vague idea in his head and then say shit that's totally fucking with people. And you know what? I would love him for that, because a huge part of what, I mean, again, like you said, how when Jaime pushed Bran out that window, like what we love about that man is how he messes with tropes, how he subverts our expectations. That's how he's got us all on the hook.
100%.
Right? Like he could be telling us a straight up medieval story and we'd be like, oh, there's a million of those. Like there's a million heroes' tales. There's a million, like, and he loves to put them in. You know, there's so many elements of both Jon and Daenerys' stories that are, you know, the classic hero's journey parts. And so you just have to ask yourself, like, is this guy the guy who's going to do that? Or is this guy going to be the guy who's going to pretend? See, it's like, this is how I work with, this is how my mind works with him. It's just like, what if he's trained us to think he always subvert things, and then in the end, he actually does a classic hero story, and that would be the greatest kind of subversion of them all in a way, because he's so trained us. I really, really like to have my expectations subverted. It's like, I really enjoy that.
It's funny because every time he does it, I clearly remember my reaction. Mm-hmm. I remember exactly where I was for season 1, episode 9, Baylor, when Ned's head gets chopped off. You know, I
think everyone does. I feel like that it's impossible not to. And I'm sure, like, for book readers, I don't know how. I feel like we know a lot of people who read the books before the show. I feel like that's not a question I've asked many times. Like that. I'm happy, honestly. It's like the one time in my life where I'm like, I'm really happy I watched the show before reading the books for season 1.
Yes.
I'm really happy I got to experience that in a television show.
And now being beyond the books, and I think with the show runners trying to be true to George's style, I think when they went beyond the books and still managed to surprise us, those were some really wonderful moments. I mean, season 7, really the only person who surprised me was Cersei. Some of the moves that she did, I did not see that.
Well, it was
coming.
It was Cersei and Jaime, though. Like the military one was fabulous.
Yes. All of a sudden, Jaime is learning things, but then poor Jaime still loses at the end of the day. Even like the man could not get a win.
No.
But I was shocked during the last episode when Euron Greyjoy seems very shook by this white that they've brought down. He asked if they could swim, and he's like, peace, I'm out. I'm not trying to deal with this stuff. I've been all over the world. Ain't nothing scare me, but this shit scares me. I'm gone. I'm going back to my island. See y'all later. Good luck. And then Cersei's like, do you really think he left me? Seriously? Right. And my jaw dropped. It dropped.
That's so great. That's so great.
I was not expecting Cersei to suddenly wise up because Cersei did some dumb ass shit for so many seasons in a row, made some really bad choices, and then all of a sudden, it's like she got this clarity. Once she wasn't so focused on her children. Once that was gone, it was like all of a sudden she had this clarity, and all of a sudden she was making these moves that made sense, but really surprised the viewer. Or at least they really surprised me.
No, that one is good. Yeah. For me, the biggest one, and the one that I found most satisfying in the end, was the Casterly Rock one, because we were so surprised, and then you have to confront the fact that you shouldn't have been surprised because you saw Robb do this exact same move.
Right.
And then I did back to the whole magic versus politics thing. Like that was a moment where you could have decided, holy shit, Daenerys is in Westeros and she's got her dragons and she's got her Dothraki. Like this feels like a done deal already, right? Like there is that moment in the very beginning where it feels like, how could she lose?
Tyrion.
Right. I mean, he really fucked things
Tyrion.
up. Right. This season really put a strain on this whole, Tyrion is so smart, that I drink and I know things, which is like, well, you definitely drink.
Here's the thing. I still think he's smart. I still think he's very smart. I just think that he still loves his family.
Yeah.
And he's torn, and it's going to cloud his decision making, right?
Okay.
Maybe.
So let's talk about something that I added to the list very late when I was watching the last episode of season 7 just now. Let's discuss. This is also I get nervous every time I border into prediction stuff, because you should see we did
do it, Daphne, do it.
We did predictions for season 4 of Black Sails, and it was me and Liz and Lauren Sarner, and oh man, we failed. Lauren did much better than me and Liz, but it was so bad. Okay. But the thing that I noticed in the last episode of season 7, just today when I was watching it, I mean, I've always known this happens. So we have Cersei basically have a conference with each of her brothers, right? And in both times, the brothers basically dare her to have the mountain kill them, right?
Mm-hmm. And she thinks about it.
But she nodded her head for
Jaime.
For Jaime. She obviously couldn't do it for Tyrion for whatever reason, although I can't. So I was just like, shit, wait, what? This did make me start thinking, again, Tyrion loves Daenerys. I think he's devoted to her, but oh my God, how crazy would it be if he was double dealing on some level, or maybe just at the end, or thought he was serving her, but ends up double dealing because of his sister. This is very confusing to me. And one of my ideas was that maybe part of whatever deal that happened off screen, which I gotta say from a storytelling perspective, I don't really love. It feels like we saw their whole time together, and yet it also feels like there is something that happened off camera
100%.
that we don't know about. But I don't from a storytelling perspective, I don't like that. I don't like that.
I'm sorry, honey. There was nothing that was said between the two of them that all of a sudden she would jump from that last bit of the conversation to saying that I accept your truth. There's no way. So there had to have been more. And I think a lot of people speculate, and this is not me making a prediction. I'm just saying a lot of people have speculated that that Tyrion promised her future child to be part of the succession.
Okay. I mean, that's, again, from just a basic storytelling perspective, I do not like when a show tricks its viewers.
Mm-hmm.
If it was obvious that there was a part of their conversation that we missed, I would feel much better about any speculation like that than if the show made it look like we saw the whole conversation, but then was like, psych! Actually, there was a whole part of that conversation that you missed.
No, I don't think they did, though. I don't think they did the latter. I feel like it was fairly...
I feel like they did.
Okay, well, we disagree on this
Right.
one. I think that that there was no way that...
No, there is an alternate explanation. There's a completely Cersei without Tyrion-based explanation for why she came down and agreed to it.
What's that?
Okay, so she was faking them out with Euron, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like there's that whole play. Mm-hmm. And then she needed to pretend that she was walking away from the table. Like this is like
to buy Euron time.
Right, because ultimately her play, we know that her ultimate play here. Yeah, I'm good at this stuff too. I don't do it for a living, but I'm actually good at it on a storytelling level. Her ultimate play has nothing to do with any of this, right? But she needed to walk away from the table to add credence to when she comes back and says yes to the truce, because none of them know about the Golden Company. So like that, right. This is all about the Golden Company. So this, I always just assumed that this was just political theater, and that, you know, all of this was about this political theater of making herself look reluctant, but then saying yes to something she always intended to say yes to, because her enemies don't know about the Golden Company. So like that's a straightforward, really good political play. The wrench that gets thrown in that is when she nods to the mountain to kill Jaime. And that's why he leaves. And so today I start thinking, did Tyrion negotiate that? Did Tyrion basically negotiate, like, give me my brother? And she looks so sad when he walks away, even though she just nodded her head to the mountain. And so, like, that's the only part of it where I start feeling like there is some sort of Cersei and Tyrion deal. Honestly, no other part of it. Yes.
For what, though?
Well, maybe for that baby theory. That could do it. That could be that, because she even says to Jaime, like, you know, basically, I don't really give a shit about you because I got this baby in my belly. So yeah, sure, that might be it, but I don't like that then.
So here's the thing. I
wanted Jaime, and it was like until that moment that I noticed that I know. I mean, I knew that she nodded, but like until I started really thinking about that nod, I always just had Jaime finally going, fuck this, I'm out of here. But then I realized the only reason he really said, fuck this, I'm out of here, it wasn't because of honor. It was because she nodded to the mountain.
But she nodded to the mountain, but the mountain didn't kill him.
Yeah, but
the mountain just moved to the side. So right. I think Cersei and the mountain have been together for years now. And I think he understands, like, which nod is the kill this motherfucker nod, right, and which nod is the let this motherfucker pass nod. Okay, well, because it was weird, because I remember everybody on Twitter was like, what just happened? She nodded and he didn't kill her. So what just happened? How does that work out? So I think there is an understanding between Cersei and the mountain that just didn't translate very well, because for the rest of us, a nod means yes.
Okay, well, I like it much better if there was no back dealing between Cersei and Tyrion, and she was just doing her play for the Golden Company, and Jaime left because finally, you know, honor became important to him. For real. Like that, you know, we've been watching him. I think one of my favorite parts of the show has been watching this internal battle for Jaime between the moral cost of being his sister's lover and some part of him that always held on to that story of him killing the Mad King because he actually wanted to save people, like him actually being a knight.
Right.
Like, so I love that this past season ended with this moment where he perhaps said, okay, I did that other thing for a really long time and now I'm done. You know, I really loved what Olenna said about her. I loved that Olenna said basically I did horrible things, and the reason she beat me was because of a lack of imagination on my part.
Yeah.
That is a great line. That's a line. See, that's the thing you were saying. Like, that's a line where it's like, I was so busy paying attention to other parts of that conversation until recently, and that's the line that hit me this time. You know, because you're so blown over, you're so bowled over by the whole, you know, tell Cersei it was me, I wanted her to know.
Right.
But the lack of imagination line, that's a line. That is a line.
They wrote Olenna like nothing else.
Oh, God,
she is one of my favorite characters.
She might be my favorite character. Yeah, she might be my favorite character. And since we don't have Marjorie anymore, I mean, in a way, Sansa is the person who is the, like, basically inheritor of who she is.
Of who Olenna is?
Yeah, like she's kind of the last person to have been influenced. I mean, I guess Daenerys to some extent, although I don't think the Be the Dragon speech is really like ultimately I feel like that's very counter to who Olenna always was, because Olenna was the one who taught Marjorie how to use stereotypical gender stuff as a political tool. And she, to some extent, through herself and through Marjorie, taught that to Sansa, which was a different lesson than the lesson Cersei taught Sansa, and a different lesson than what Littlefinger taught Sansa. Like, that's, I think, I especially love the lessons that she learned from the Tyrells, because she so embodied the stereotypical feminine, and they were the women who taught her how to weaponize it.
Right. So, you know, there's the whole do as I say, not as I do, right? So I
am aware of that as a thing.
So I feel like Olenna might be a little bit of an example of that, because if you pay attention to her interactions with Tywin.
But she's old now. She also tells the story. She tells the story.
You don't give a fuck, right?
Right, exactly. But she tells the story of herself with her husband, which was very much like a Marjorie move.
All about seduction.
Right, exactly.
He was actually betrothed to someone else.
Yep, that's what she tells the story of. So yeah, that's what I say. I mean, that's also a neat thing about Olenna, is that we don't get a lot of older women. So she gets the whole, like, when you're young and hot, you like play that thing. And then when you're old like me and you have all the gold and all the grain and all the everything, then you get to play a different game.
But I think she realizes that Dany is on a different playing field because of all the things that we discussed before, right? So she gets to be a dragon. That's true. Her family, they're flowers. They're roses. They don't get to,
except for her. She's the thorns.
Yes, she's the thorns, which is why we love her. But she recognizes that Dany is a different sort of woman. Dany doesn't have to resort to feminine wiles in order to get what she wants. She could just get on a dragon and go and take what she wants by fire and blood, right?
Right. And again, we know that Olenna wants that because she wants revenge.
But I think also she wants to inspire Dany a little bit at the same time. I mean, she is truly excited by the idea of powerful women. She loves Sansa, wanted to take her under her wing. The reaction she had when she saw Brienne for the first time, aren't you marvelous or magnificent or whatever it was that she said. I mean, she is really, she's fighting
for the gender. As long as she can be primarily for her family, she's fighting for gender.
Of course.
But you have to remember that the thing that Ellaria used to get her to come work with Daenerys in the first place was the idea of revenge. Like, that is what Ellaria offered her.
Right.
Okay, let's move on to the Starks, which is kind of amazing considering who we are, that we've gone this long without really talking about them. I would like to move on to Arya and Sansa. I mean, also Jon, although he's not a Stark. Oh, he is a Stark. Whatever the hell he is. Okay, but first I would like to talk about Arya and Sansa, and then I would like to talk about Jon's place in all of this. just moment of appreciation, like that cold open in the beginning of season 7.
Oh.
Like, never doesn't delight me. I love it so much. It gives me so much joy. It's really beautifully done. This brings me into the place that I said I was going to restrain myself. Like, I guess I'm just going to get this out. Like, I love these two characters so much. I love how the interplay of their personalities and their relationships to gender has morphed and evolved in relation to each other throughout the story, which is incredible. I really, 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 really dislike the whole killing Littlefinger plot. Because of the thing I said before that I don't like in storytelling is they just chose to show us some things but not the full thing in order to literally trick us as the audience. Like and I keep rewatching it, and it actually makes me more angry each time, but I keep rewatching it trying to like pinpoint the moment when Arya and Sansa actually maybe started working together. And it's impossible because the story is just choosing to keep us as the viewers in the dark for the sake of a surprise, which is just, I hate it. I really hate it.
I'm with you. I found it incredibly
annoying.
Very
manipulative. It's manipulative.
Right, and trying to pinpoint, I did the same thing where I was trying to pinpoint when were they on the same team.
Right.
Were they both, because first of all, Arya has been trained by the Faceless Men for years, right? She is a grade A assassin.
Also good at figuring out the whole lying thing, remember? Like, they would bring that up, and yet they don't use it properly.
But somehow Littlefinger was able to realize that Arya was stalking him. And then Arya didn't realize that Littlefinger was observing her in his room. Like, how does that work? How is that logical? So I start spinning, of course. And I'm like, well, Arya is clearly pretending and being bad so that Littlefinger will think that she's following him and trip up. And all of a sudden, all of these theories. But no, really.
That would have been a great storyline. Except that she was being hostile to Sansa in private. Right. So that's the part where they're trying to trick us. It's like if even if you were kind of tricked, but you could go back and rewatch it and be like, holy shit, look what Arya's doing. Like, she's been manipulating this the whole time. Like, she and Sansa have been manipulating this the whole time. If I could go back at a rewatch and see that, I would have been fine with it. But what happens is they trick us by showing these moments of discord between them when clearly no one is watching but us.
Right.
So that's when they're tricking us. They're just making it look like what is their motivation to trick? What is Arya and Sansa's motivation to trick an audience that they're not aware is watching them because they don't know they're in a television show? So they have no motivation to trick us when they're alone in a room.
So all the times that I rewatched season 7, I came to the conclusion that Sansa knew what was up when she had that last conversation with Littlefinger, where he brings her to the conclusion that Arya wants to be Lady of Winterfell, and Sansa goes, "That's not her." Right. No, I also agree. And then the very next conversation is in the Great Hall, where Littlefinger is executed. So you miss the entire Stark sibling team up when hopefully Sansa, Arya, and the all-knowing Bran get together and have a conversation, and they're like, okay, how are we going to play this out? Because he has been playing us.
Right. See, but that happened off camera. Had that happened on camera, had they valued the integrity of the story over tricking the audience, it would have actually, they still could have played the scene where they actually kill him the exact same way. And instead of tricking us into thinking that Sansa is about to have Arya killed, it would have actually been, I think, more exhilarating for us as an audience if we knew that they were tricking Littlefinger and watched that play out. their ability to trick Littlefinger is a whole different thing that we don't need to get into. I'm just going to say quickly, I think that they broke his character. He outsmarted everyone in all of Westeros, and yet these two girls, they're very smart. I like them a lot. But the idea that the two of them can outsmart him really bothers me. Like, that he would allow himself to be outsmarted because of some, like, you know, sudden vulnerability he has that he didn't have before to Sansa. That aside, like, that's, you know, a lot of people don't give a shit about Littlefinger, so they were just happy enough that he died that they don't care that they broke his character. I found his character an unbelievably interesting part of this overall story, so it bothers me that they made him suddenly stupid. But I also think that it would have been a much more satisfying experience for me as a fan of Arya and Sansa and someone who's so enjoyed watching their development to be let in on this secret rather than tricked.
Right.
Because I felt cheated. I felt duped, and not in a satisfying way. Like, sometimes you get a surprise. Sometimes there's a twist in a story that you're like, oh, cool. But twists in stories only work if you don't then look back and say, oh, the storyteller, like, actively tricked me. Actively basically gave me false information so that this twist would work.
Right. So I liked the twist, right? I liked the fact that I didn't know that Lord Baelish was going to get his comeuppance in that moment. I actually, when Sansa paused and said Lord Baelish, I literally jumped out of my chair and did a victory lap around my watch party, right? But the thing is, I expected Sansa to eventually best Littlefinger. Because at some
I did too.
point,
no, I did too.
At some point, right, the student becomes the master.
Right.
And
it's
hopefully a greater master than their teacher. That's the hope, right? That's what all teachers hope for. And I feel like I'm about to quote The Last Jedi. But, you know, like...
Right.
But... So I expected that, and I wanted that. I wanted the sisters to team up in a way so that they could bring Littlefinger down. And I expected that for Sansa. I did. So I didn't feel as though that was untrue to his character. Where I think the writers did him dirty was his response. Where all of a sudden he didn't know what to say.
Oh,
he was crying and he was begging, and that was not Littlefinger. Now I understand that he's in love with Sansa, maybe in a way that he wasn't with Cat. I don't know if a man like Littlefinger can truly know love, since he's so narcissistic. Mm-hmm. That really, can he love anybody more than he loves himself? But I just couldn't buy his reaction at all to the charges.
Let me propose, having said in the beginning of this podcast that I don't want to rewrite other people's television, but let me just propose this one situation. What if this had played out in an environment of ambiguity? Like the scenes where, you know, like where Arya and Brienne are fighting and you can't read Sansa's reaction. All of those scenes, right?
That would have been better.
So if this whole thing had been played out with ambiguity minus the two, I think it's two scenes you have where Sansa and Arya are clearly alone and acting hostile to each other in a way that you don't see resolved.
Right.
So if there had just been ambiguity, right? A little bit of conflict, but like the scene, basically the faces scene is really the one that bothers me the most. Mm-hmm. Like the faces scene, like yes, Arya does hand Sansa the knife in the end, but it's just like,
what is this?
Right, exactly. So it's like if the whole thing up until when they kill Littlefinger, you can still have that twist, but if you keep it within the realm of ambiguity, if they had the confidence in us to like go with them down that road of ambiguity and have that surprise, I feel like what happened was they lacked the confidence to do that story. So they needed to actually suggest to us the opposite of what's actually happening and trick us. And we would have had that satisfying twist if we just had ambiguity. But they didn't allow us that experience. Okay. But
Daphne, have you ever thought about writing screenplays? Because I feel like that was just excellent. I would watch that. I would have watched that episode and loved it.
Okay, enough about that. Okay, so, but let's talk about stuff that's more interesting about Arya and Sansa. What I would really love to talk about, like back to our whole promise, I really am going to take us to talking about Jon, but like in terms of all of our women again, there's a line that is fascinating to me on many levels. So when at the end they talk about the lone wolf dies and the pack survives, like one, I love in general how much, not just Ned, but characters who have died stay alive in the hearts of their loved ones and their families in particular. Like the whole clan aspect of the way that these houses work, where people really, the dead still live in the hearts and the words and the actions of the living, is just, it's a beautiful aspect of the show. It really, really is, in general. But also, that's a really interesting thematic thing, because we have just started to have Stark reunions, but not just that. They are the house that is still somewhat alive.
Yeah.
And unified. And we had all, like, a lot of season 7 was about how they should lead as a family. Like, you had all the stuff with Sansa and Jon about, you know, how she might be undermining his leadership, how they need to negotiate this. We have the beautiful moment where he tells her the North is hers because he has to go be with he has to go talk to Daenerys. I just find this really interesting in relation to Daenerys, who is not alone. We did talk about this. She has her advisors, she has her people, she has a lot of things. But then Cersei, who is now literally pushed away everyone. And I just find this also another kind of multi-point kind of thematic thing that's going to be really interesting to look at in season 8, like the idea of lone wolves and packs. I don't know yet what the kind of worldview of the show, where it's taking us in terms of that. Like, we know how that relates to Starks, but I feel like that is kind of a really integral question ultimately in the worldview of the show. Because again, when you come to like a magical being like Daenerys, there is some aspect of that is always lone wolfish. Because even though she can make coalitions and have advisors and all of that, ultimately the power rests literally in her body. Like, yes, also her dragons, but they were kind of created by her body in a way. But you know what I mean? Like, so there's something about her that is always going to be a lone wolf, even though she's a dragon. But, you know, but like the idea of a lone wolf. There's something about her that will always be based on the idea of the one.
Even though the dragon has 3 heads. Even though the dragon
has 3 heads, that's a very, like, I am really curious how they're going to play that out, and I don't really have anything to say about that right now. I know there's a million theories about where that goes. I've always loved that concept. I think, like, turning one of the dragons into an ice dragon makes that, like, way more complicated and interesting, because the literal dragons are not 3 anymore. I don't know where that's going to go. But I do think that there is something that, and maybe this was not the original intent of the book, but there's not really any point in us like spending a lot of time like trying to figure out what the intent of the books that we don't have yet, hopefully will have, where they were planning on going. But in the realm of the show, I feel like the dragon has 3 heads can only really ever be metaphorical. Like, yes, there is the idea that Jon will ride another dragon, so then like the 3 heads at this point, because one dragon is with the Ice King, would like, that's now going to be like 2 heads and a disjointed head. I'm not really sure where they're going with that.
2.5 heads.
Right. But the idea of the pack is something that is a tangible concept that has kind of in the Starks has become a thing that we have again. Like, that as weird as Bran is, and as much as he isn't really Bran anymore, there is this sense that like they are working in tangent. They're working in coalition with each other and are stronger for it.
Well, I mean, I feel like there are so many stories out there that contrast the man who thinks he's an island to
right.
the folks who work together to build something together. And Cersei has definitely isolated herself. She literally has a bounty on her younger brother's head. She sent her other brother away. She was somehow partly to blame for the death of all of her children. So anyone she's cared about, she has exiled. I think she only has one member on her small council now, and it's Qyburn, who's her hand, who just does her bidding, and that's
her sycophant.
Right.
He's not an advisor.
So especially because the original writer of the concept of this show is an American, sometimes I think, is Westeros heading towards a democracy? Like, is that what's happening? Tyrion did bring up the Kingsmoot when talking to Daenerys about the succession and how leaders are chosen.
Well, he also brought up the Night's Watch, which is also a democratic system.
Exactly. So, which is also people coming together as a pack and making a collective decision. So yeah, I've definitely thought about that in terms of how does this story end? Where does it go? And will there be a throne at the end of it all, or are we heading towards a democracy? Like what is happening? But I'm a fan of Hillary Clinton, so I always say we're stronger together, guys.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be really interesting. So, okay. And then within that, I would like to talk about our reincarnation boys, Beric Dondarrion and Jon Snow.
Our fire whites.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love Beric, but I guess I'm mostly talking about Beric because of the stuff he says to Jon. Like, it's very interesting to me. Beric, he says good words in season 7. I've got to say, he really does.
And he says them so well. God,
that's true. Yeah. So he's very pleasant to listen to as well. So I find it very interesting, like where Jon fits into all of this, because he is a reluctant leader. And even though, he says a lot of speeches about not bending the knee in season 7, I think it's also an interesting juxtaposition to our women, or at least 2 of our women, is that Jon seems to serve more than rule.
I like this concept.
I mean, that just seems to me really to be his focus as a ruler. And do you remember when Tywin and, oh my God, I'm so bad at names today. This is not the day to be bad at names when we're talking about this show. Tywin is talking to...
What was the conversation about? I'll tell you.
Youngest son of Cersei. Oh my God.
Oh, to Tommen.
Right, to Tommen. Everyone's going to be like, okay, we're just turning this off. This woman can't remember people's names. You remember they were going through like the different concepts of leadership where he's asking, this kind of leader. I mean, he had his own agenda there. But I always think about that. Like, I always think about this idea that, like, this show really is presenting us with a lot of ideas of what leadership can look like. And again, this again is another thing where I'm just like, oh, I'm really curious how this is all going to play out. And yeah, that's what I keep thinking about Jon. It's really interesting. I mean, and that goes back to Ned, and it's really interesting that I feel like that is the direction he's taken it. And that really goes well with the things that Beric said to him, was just like, we've been brought back for a reason.
And they don't know what that reason is.
They don't know what that reason is, but the implication is that we've been brought, it's not like we've been brought back because like we should go have cocktails on a beach somewhere. It's like we've been brought back to serve. And I just find that so interesting. Like, it's just so in a show where, one of my favorite original lines is, in the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. Like this whole thing about, it's just everyone's grasping for power. This idea of serving is fascinating to me.
And that's all he's ever wanted to do. He wanted
Right.
to serve the Night's Watch, which serves the realm of men.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
And then being King of the North, he's definitely serving his people. And he keeps saying that over and over as he buffs Daenerys' request to bend the knee until he sees that, oh no, she will put herself on the line for us.
Exactly.
So I'm happy to call her my queen and then bend the knee to her in bed.
That too. But no,
Yeah.
but I think, but all jokes about nudity and, I know that you have those, all the sex aside, I think that even when he does choose to swear allegiance to her, it's in service. It's when he realizes that she also has a side of her that isn't about pride, that is about service. And he has struggled with pride himself. Like in season 1,
Oh, yes.
his whole thing about like, I should be a ranger, like that was absolutely, he has grappled with that. He has grappled with the urge towards glory.
And he was a little bit like Cersei in the beginning, thinking that he knew everything, that he had been he had received all the training he needed.
Interesting.
And
You're right.
mom,
he was a cocky ass. That's right. You're right.
And say, "You want to be a leader someday? Well, learn to follow.
Right.
You still
that's
have
true.
some learning to do, kid.
And
Learn to follow."
He literally got placed in a job where he serves.
Yes. So yeah, I think that's a great observation, Daphne. I really do.
I just don't know where that is all going to go, but it's super interesting.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that's my main thing about talking about season 7 right now. It's just like we're so close to the end, which is very sad on many levels, obviously. But the beautiful thing about the end of a show, and I had this, even with Black Sails, which was like, my heart broke into a million pieces when it was over. But even so, I was excited for season 4 because when a show is complete, that's, if it's done well, when a show is complete is when you really can like actually see the object that it is in its entirety and understand it in ways that you never could understand it before. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, agreed. Can I just make one point about Beric and Jon?
Of course. You can make as many points as you want about them.
Well, just this one.
Okay.
I believe Beric when they say that they have been brought back for a purpose.
I do too.
And the one scene that makes me believe that 100% was the Battle of the Bastards, where Jon kind of has a death wish,
Yeah.
He's been in a funk ever since he realized that, yes, my brothers betrayed me just because I was trying to do the right thing. They murdered me, and now I'm back. This is very upsetting. So he goes into this battle kind of hoping to die, and then comes close to death.
Yeah.
And that's when he realizes, no, I want to live. And he fights, right? But before that happens, there are so many arrows raining down on the scene. And he is parrying and fighting and swirling around. And the arrows literally just fall around him. And I remember saying out loud, oh my God, he's chosen. He is chosen. He is guarded by whatever fate or gods or whatever. He is special in some way because one of those arrows would have found him. Any other person, more than one of those arrows would have found him. But I think that was the show's way of depicting to us that Jon is in fact a chosen character by whomever on high, some way or another. I haven't necessarily seen that with Beric because poor Beric keeps dying over and over again. But the fact that he is able to come back.
maybe Barrick's purpose was to be a model for John. I mean, I think it's very possible that Barrick came back over and over again in part so that he could have that conversation with John, because he's proof. What you just said segues very beautifully to something that you added to the list of topics, was the idea of prophecies and whether or not we think they're true. Is that your question? Oh, are they coming true? Oh, right, because this was under my season 8 things. What I intended to come into it saying was basically what Melisandre says. Like, basically, she's like, when she brought John back to life, she didn't have that power. The Lord of Light had that power. That may be true. That may be not true. And I think that's kind of what's most fascinating to me about the way that the show has treated religion and prophecy, because it has magic. Like, there is no question. Like, it's not one of those stories where like, ooh, I could see it this way and I could see it that way. There is absolutely magic in this world. And yet it still leaves this beautiful ambiguity about whether the magic and the religion are tied to each other, because religion is always created by people.
I think, right. So religion, to me, tries to explain things that we can't explain, right?
That's one way to look at religion in our world,
explain. Right. And then people also say that that's what magic is, that something that is science, right? That we can't explain because we just don't know the scientific language for it yet. That's magic.
And that's how the Citadel, I mean, that's an interesting thing in the show, is that the Citadel is absolutely of that perspective. And when we see them talk that way to Sam, we're like, no, actually, dudes, y'all have no idea what's going on.
I get so frustrated every time I watch those scenes with Sam. I feel like, everything, like literally so much knowledge is at your fingertips and you just want to remain willfully ignorant so that you can debate shit. Like, these guys are on Twitter, as far as I'm concerned. Like, everybody in Old Town has a Twitter account.
It's like doing Game of Thrones theories. Oh, that's so true. Okay, I have a slightly different take on it, because I do like what they say about how they look in the long term in a way that most humans can't. Like, that is a good argument. Like, it was like, yes, you think that every war is the last war. That's true until this moment when magic has actually taken over. So I just feel like the conversations at the Citadel are a really interesting microcosm of the worldview of the show as a whole. Like, yes, human beings, like just mere mortals like us, we lose perspective all the time because everything seems urgent to us in the moment about our lives. So we often lose the big picture. So yes, they're absolutely right about that. And on the flip side, we're in a world of dragons and ice dragons. So like suddenly a lot of the shit, and literally he said the wall has stood forever. Like, we are watching their world in the most exceptional times for real. Yeah. So it's just yes, I agree with you. Totally aggravating. Like, when you're in Sam's POV watching it, you're just like, fuck y'all. Like, this is crazy. You're not helping me. And I'm trying to do actual things to save everyone. But in a larger philosophical way to look at the show and reality and magic and not magic, I found all of those scenes really fascinating. Yeah. So in terms of prophecy, I guess my big answer is like, we just don't know yet. And I feel like the show has the potential to not be definitively one or the other, and that could, if they do it right, be really an interesting stance. Like, that could end up being like the kind of thing that's really interesting to think about, long after the show is over. Like, where prophecy and magic and belief and all of these things, where they intersect, and how sometimes they're doing the same thing and sometimes they're doing different things.
Right. I mean, and there are a few prophecies that have started to come true.
Maybe.
And aren't, right? But, I mean, so the most obvious one, I think, is Maggie the Frog's prophecy, right? That Cersei,
or did Cersei create that to some extent when she was trying to avoid it?
I mean, well, that's the thing with prophecy. You know, can you change prophecy once you hear it? Or,
Right.
you know, are they self-fulfilling? You know,
Right.
maybe none of this would have happened if she didn't go and demand that Maggie tell her fortune.
Exactly.
But she did. So here we are. And we have it. And 3 of her children wore golden shrouds because they died as either kings or royal princesses. And
Yep.
now you're still waiting for this younger, more beautiful woman to come and take everything that she holds dear. She thought it was Marjorie.
Well,
Is it
that's
Dany?
right.
Is it
That's
Sansa?
that's
You know?
the thing but that's the thing about prophecy is like you hear these words and then you can both create it through human fold, or you can also keep rereading the same prophecy over and over again and be like, okay, I got it wrong, but now it's the thing. It's like you
Right.
have these words and you can. It's the question is like, is the prophecy determining what's happening, or are you just fitting the reality of your life by, you know, it's the the correlation and causality question. Like,
Right. Well, I've got a prophecy for you that that I think is a good contrast to that point, and that's the stallion who will mount the world. Right? So that was the prophecy that was placed upon Rhaego, who was Dany's stillborn child, saying that, you know, he will be the one to unite all the Khalasars, right? And mount the world. But the prophecy wasn't necessarily about Rhaego. Is it about Dany? Because
Right.
Dany
Exactly.
did unite all of the Khalasars, brought them to Westeros, and is she now going to rule Westeros as the stallion who mounts the world? I mean, and she literally would mount the world because as far as we know, the world is Westeros and Essos, and she has ruled so much of, or at least she has conquered much of Essos, and now she's trying to do the same in Westeros. So is she the stallion who mounts the world?
Right. So you're exactly doing what is interesting to me about prophecy is not that it's a roadmap that everyone has to take, but it becomes a framework in which to start asking questions about
Right.
what's going on. And that's, for me personally, that's the most interesting way to look at prophecy.
Yeah, all I have are questions for season 8. I barely have any statements whatsoever. It's just a bunch of questions.
All right. Well, speaking of questions, actually, let's start with our favorite things. Why don't you tell me your favorite thing, and then we're going to bring up some questions that we don't actually have time to ask because we had so much fun talking that we didn't get to the question part. But we will point everyone in the direction of where to read these questions. Okay. First, tell me your favorite thing.
So my favorite thing when I rewatched season 7 was a moment that I did not expect to be my favorite thing. In fact, I got a little emotional watching it. I mean, I didn't cry or anything, but my chest was full with feelings. And it was the scene with Theon and Jon in the throne room at Dragonstone, and then Theon on the beach. So Theon Greyjoy right now is my favorite thing, which is a big shocker.
Wow.
Theon Greyjoy has never been my favorite thing about anything. Ever. Ever. But Theon, oh my God. Okay, so this scene in Dragonstone where he's talking to Jon, and he's like, dude, you've always known the right thing to do. And to me, I feel like I've been in an impossible situation where I had to make a choice where neither option was the right one. And Theon is just extremely vulnerable in this moment with Jon. I mean, and Jon lets him have it because Theon has done some shit to his family, okay? Like, Jon gets to have his feelings with Theon. He gets to be mad. And Theon is just owning everything that Jon is putting on him. Like, my father treated you better than your father treated you. Yup, he did. And you betrayed him. Yes. I did. And there was no hiding it. There was no masking. There was no bravado. Theon has just been stripped bare. And I think they've done a beautiful job in demonstrating what it's like to be existing with trauma. Mm-hmm. That there are days where you're almost overcoming it, and then there are days where you just get triggered and you fall apart, and it's just every day is literally struggle.
And that doesn't mean that you're like out forever. Like right. That you also
right.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a beautiful moment with him and Jon, where Jon's like, listen, you don't have to be a Greyjoy or a Stark. You can be a Greyjoy. No, not that you can be. You are right. A Greyjoy and a Stark. And that validation from Jon, I think, was incredibly powerful for Theon and freeing. So freeing, so that when he goes to the beach and he tells his men that we're going to go get Yara. And they're like, fuck you, dude. Like, we're not interested in that. Do you know what we're up against? Yeah, nah, we're not doing that. And he's like, no, we're going to go and get her, which is such a Stark thing to do. Mm-hmm. And then they start fighting in order for Theon to establish his dominance. And it's such a Greyjoy way of resolving things. And then he goes and he baptizes himself with the salt water at the end, like a real Greyjoy.
Oh, wow.
I just thought it was an amazing moment, that what he was fighting for was so Stark-like, but the way in which he fought for it was very much a Greyjoy.
Oh, I really like that. I never thought about that as like the beach scene being this marrying of his two selves in that kind of symbolic way. That's lovely.
Yeah.
My favorite thing, I have a lot of, I mean, my favorite thing that is not my real one, but I want to say it anyway, because I needed more of this. Like, part of why I like the earlier seasons is because there's just a lot more time for characters like that moment to like just talk to each other. So like every time we got that in this season, I was so happy, which is why I love the North of the Wall episode, even though a lot of people have a lot of things to fight. A lot of people don't like that episode. Actually, the like actual fighting part gets a little tedious for me, but like just having all these people talk to each other, I remember just going like, I mean, as much as I love the battle for the loot train where you finally get the dragons and the Dothraki and all the craziness, was like, I loved that. But I also just loved, like, I was just like, I didn't realize until that moment how starved I was for just characters talking to each other. But my favorite thing now, also kind of a similar thing, because I did not love Sansa in the beginning, and now I love her so much. I love in this season people recognizing what a badass she is. Yes. So like, I love when she's just like, how can you abandon us? And he's like, I'm not, dude. I'm leaving the North with you, and you can take care of this. You are so capable. And then the moment where he and Tyrion are talking, and when he's like, she lets on, like, oh, she doesn't let on how smart she is.
She's smarter than she lets on.
And he's like, she started letting on. I love that.
And it's
so
such
much.
a Big Brother way of saying it too, like with a little bit of pride, but like, and she's such a fucking pain in my ass. Like,
right. But she's
such a Big Brother way of saying it.
Yes. So yes, I love that. From now on, I gauge how I feel about every character based on how they perceive Sansa. And if they are pro Sansa and if they recognize how amazing she is, I like them a lot better for it.
That's a fair metric.
Right? That's my new metric. That is my metric. I'm going into season 8 with that being my metric. How people see Sansa is how I see them. Okay, so I did bring up questions. We were going to go through these questions, but I'm going to instead put a link to this. Our friend Kim Renfro, who writes for Insider and also happens to be writing a book about Game of Thrones, which will come out after season 8.
Woo,
She writes amazing things in general about Game of Thrones and about other shows. But I was particularly delighted by this post that she did, which was a bunch of questions going into season 8. So sorry you don't get to hear us answer them. You'll just have to read and answer those for yourself. The link will be in the show notes. And we also wanted to quickly go through, because we have so many friends who are journalists covering Game of Thrones, we wanted to give you all the service of pointing you in the direction of them. There will be links to every single person I'm mentioning here in the show notes. So, Lauren Sarner, anyone who listens to our podcasts knows Lauren because she also covered Black Sails and was on Fathoms Deep many times. She has also been on Can I Just Say, because she and I covered Outlander together for a little while. That was fun and hilarious. So Lauren is at the New York Post, and she'll be covering Game of Thrones. Michelle Jaworski writes for the Daily Dot and will be covering Game of Thrones, and she also has a newsletter this season. Lindsay Romaine writes for Nerdist. I believe, she's been writing and will continue writing about Game of Thrones. Kim, we just mentioned. You should be. There are many podcasts, and I wish I could name them all, but I'm going to assume that most of you listen to Storm of Spoilers, and if you don't, then you should. And also Cast of Kings. Both of those have Joanna Robinson, who writes for Vanity Fair and is pretty much my favorite person to listen to anything about Game of Thrones, because she just knows more than almost everyone, if not everyone. Storm Spoilers also has Dave Gonzalez, who will be writing on Thrillist.com about Game of Thrones, and Neil Miller, who is the head honcho of Film School Rejects, and he, amongst some of his writers, will be writing for Film School Rejects about Game of Thrones. That is a lot of people. They're all amazing, believe it or not.
Amazing.
I know, I listen to and read every single one of them. Okay, and Christine, you had someone that you wanted to recommend, yes?
Yes, I wanted to let you all know about a brand new podcast called Your Watch Begins. It is for people who have watched Game of Thrones but don't have time to rewatch the entire series before season 8 begins. So if you need a quick refresh, listen to Your Watch Begins. It features Pollock and Samit, who are good friends of mine, and I will be popping in and out of conversation as a contributor. So give them a listen.
Okay, so we'll have that in the show notes as well. And I think that's about it. I mean, I didn't ask you privately, and if you say no, I'll cut this out. I didn't ask you privately, Christine, but do you want to talk about after season 8? Should we do another episode?
Oh my God,
this
yes.
baby up? Okay.
Yes. I am 100% on board to having another conversation with you. Your second podcast on Game of Thrones.
Yep.
If you feel like doing one during the season, I'm totally game too. But
okay.
I am here for end of season. Any conversation you want to have about Game of Thrones, I am more than happy to have it.
Oh, that's so much fun. Okay, so yeah, we are actually going to take a little bit of a break because Elizabeth is very busy and I am going out of the country for a little bit. So I don't actually know what we're doing next. Maybe we'll do another Game of Thrones episode if Liz is still busy. But yes, we will have another episode in a few weeks. In the meantime, we did, just for our Patreon supporters, do the commentary track for episode 107 of Black Sails with our very special guest and cabin boy, Andrew Dice. That is definitely my favorite commentary track so far. And Christine, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, just look me up on Twitter. So it's Kippinsk, Kippinsk. And I am more than happy to talk to you about Game of Thrones, maybe a little bit of Black Sails, baseball, politics, whatever. So give me a shout.
Oh, we need to get you to do a commentary track with us.
Oh, on Black Sails?
Yeah, that would be really fun.
That would be so much fun.
Okay, we'll talk about that later. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, so much. Thank you, Christine, for doing this with me. This is so much fun.
Thank you for having me on. I love talking about all things with you.
Me too. Yes. And we will both be at Con of Thrones doing our panel, which you named. Tell me the panel name again.
So it's called #I'mWithHer, Westerosi women in politics. It's a continuation of our Queendom of Thrones panel from last year. So if you were there at Con of Thrones last year or listened to Daphne's podcast of it, it's kind of like part two. So we've got the whole gang back together with Lauren Sarner and Kim Renfro.
Right. And that is in our podcast feed. It's called Queendom of Thrones, or wait, what did we call it?
Yeah, the Queendom.
Queendom of Thrones.
Yeah, the Queendom of Thrones.
They named it. So yes, that is in our podcast feed, and y'all should come to Con of Thrones because it's really fun.
Oh my God, it's so much fun.
It's so much fun. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Enjoy season 8. We'll be back at the very least at the end of season 8 to talk about it. Things are going to happen, and I have no idea what they're going to be.
Things are going to happen. We can guarantee that.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, sweetie. Can I Just Say Podcast is a Common Room Radio production. For more information and our other shows, visit commonroomradio.com. To show your support, pledges of as little as $1 a month can make a big difference. Visit patreon.com/commonroomradio to pledge support and access bonus features that are just for patrons. And join the conversation by using the hashtag #CanIJustSay and follow us on Twitter @JustSayPodcast. We request that you keep your tweets respectful and positive, and you can always email us at podcast@commonroomradio.com. Thanks for listening.